Hey guys, tonight we drift into the misty pre-dawn waters of Aotearoa, where the air smells like damp flax and driftwood and where the waves lap against the side of your canoe with a rhythmic hush that's older than empires. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, eyes squinting at the shore ahead, barely visible in the dense fog. But there, through the mist, something emerges. Not just a figure, but a face. And not just any face, it's carved, layered, speaking without words. Lines spiral across cheeks, down the nose, around the lips. This isn't a decoration, it's a declaration. That face belongs to a rangatira, a Maori chief, and tonight it's going to tell you things no pen or paper ever could. You might have brought your passport, but it's useless here. In this world, your identity is literally on your skin, and you'd better hope it's been chiseled right. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these sleepy little history rambles reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the sand, the canoe rocking gently behind you. Your feet sink in just enough to remind you this place is real, cold, damp, ancient. The rangatira nods once. You nod back. You have no moko. You're a blank scroll, but you're here to learn. In the pre-colonial Maori world, the art of tamoko wasn't some weekend tattoo adventure or edgy aesthetic choice. It was a full-body resume, legal document, and deeply personal sacred ritual. And you didn't just get one to look cool, it hurt. A lot. But we'll get to that part later. For now, picture yourself standing among elders, warriors, and weavers. No metal armor, no swords, just flax skirts, carved staffs, and skin that shouts stories in spirals and ridges. Everyone's watching you, not in judgment exactly, just curious. Because you're one of those strange ones, face blank, soul uninscribed. It's hard to overstate how important the moko is in this world. It told people who you were, who you belonged to, what land was yours, who your great-great-grandfather paddled beside, and whether you had the mana, the authority to speak, to challenge, to lead. And no two were alike. Sure, certain patterns showed up often, like spirals on the cheeks called puhoro, or hammerhead lines across the brow. But every moko was bespoke, custom fit to your life story. That story wasn't just decided by you either. Your Tohungata Moko, the tattoo priest, would sit with you, hear your genealogy, your hopes, your duties. Then he'd start designing. No Pinterest boards, just ancestral intuition and centuries of tradition passed down by calloused hands. Here's the kicker, though, you didn't get a moko. You earned it. The process wasn't instant. It was sacred, ceremonial, dangerous even. And painful, really painful. Now let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive the first hour of it. There are no buzzing machines or numbing creams here, just sharpened bone chisels, dark natural pigment and rhythmic tapping deep into the dermis. We'll save that full experience for later, but keep that nervous stomach in mind. Tonight's story is weirdly comforting though, isn't it? A world where your truth can't be photoshopped or password locked. Where your face doesn't just say a lot, it's the whole legal document. Birth certificate, social standing, and land deed in one. No signature required. But it wasn't all solemn stares and sacred meanings. There were little flourishes too. Some mokos had comedic elements. Some showed off a warrior's humor or flirtation. It's not just bureaucratic ink, it's human, imperfect, alive. There's even this fringe theory floating among anthropologists, hard to prove but hard to dismiss, that some Moko marks might have encoded not just Waka Papa lineage, but intertribal deals, like an IOU or land grant embedded in a chin spiral. Historians still argue whether that's fanciful overreading or legitimate proto-contract law. But you don't need to settle that tonight. You're just here to observe, to sink into the quiet weight of this place. Around you, others kneel on woven mats. A haka echoes somewhere beyond the tree line, low pulsing, reverberating in your chest. The Rangatira places a hand on your shoulder. You flinch just slightly as his moko seems to pulse in the moonlight. And then you realize something: no two lines are exactly straight. There are ridges, slight imperfections, ink that's faded in places, even a nick where a scar overtook a curve. That's the thing about legal documents made of skin. They breathe, they age, they bleed. Still, they hold their meaning. Some say the moko is a map, others a mask. But tonight for you, it's a soft drumbeat guiding your way into a different kind of law, a law etched into bone, memory, and skin. You look down at your hands, still blank, but maybe not for long. You trail behind the chief through the damp grass. The air is thick with the scent of fern and earth, and under your feet, the ground gives just slightly, like walking across a memory. It's early morning now, and the mist is beginning to lift, revealing the outlines of carved meeting houses, woven mats drying on racks, and the faint glint of shell jewelry. But it's the people who draw your gaze. Everyone has a face that speaks. At first, you try not to stare, but it's impossible. Each person you pass wears their story in full display. Spirals at the temples, crescent shapes curling from lip to ear, zigzags and notches marching up foreheads like mountain ridges. You catch the eye of an old woman with moko kawai, her chin tattoo. The lines are delicate, but there's power in them. She nods once, as if to say, yes, this is who I am. You don't need to ask. You don't speak the language here, not fluently, but the moko. You're starting to understand it as a kind of fluency all its own. The Ta Moko is often mistranslated as just tattoo. That's like calling a cathedral a building. Technically true, but profoundly incomplete. Unlike needle tattoos that insert ink through puncture, the traditional method uses uhai sharp chisels or serrated combs to carve the skin open. Pigment, often made from burnt kori gum or other natural resins, is then rubbed deep into the open wound. The result, a raised scar, often slightly shiny, that creates a texture you can feel with your fingertips. This isn't flat ink, this is topographical memory. Moko in its truest form is textured. It catches the light differently. It ages differently. If you were blindfolded and ran your hands along a chief's face, you could maybe read their story like Braille. Now imagine you're a land negotiator. You're trying to verify someone's tribal status or their claim to a fishing cove. They don't pull out a folder or scroll. They pull back their cloak. They show you their thigh, where the moko maps their ancestry, their status, their past battles and familial links. It's self-authenticating. It's decentralized identity. It's kind of genius. Even the placement of moko was deliberate. Men typically received full-face moko, including the forehead ngakaipikirao, cheeks puhoro nose rarauhe, and lips tayoho. The pattern could tell you what canoe their ancestors came in, on what position they held in tribal council, or what role they fulfilled in society. A carver could read a face the way some people read a ledger. Women often had moko kawai tattoos on the chin and lips. These too held lineage and spiritual significance, but also marked rites of passage, fertility, and social standing. And yes, there were rules. You couldn't just waltz into a village and say, "Give me one of those cool spiral jobs." You needed genealogy, consent from elders, a certain age, sometimes a certain status. Moko was sacred, not decorative. Here's something fun. Some chiefs had facial moko so distinctive that they were used to sign treaties. That's right, your face was your legal signature. Imagine showing up to a modern notary with your head instead of your ID card. There's a story from the early 1800s about a British emissary who needed a Maori chief's signature. The chief, unimpressed by ink on paper, simply had his moko drawn by a scribe instead. That sketch of his facial tattoo was legally binding. Try forging that. In a world with no centralized filing system, no photo IDs, no DNA tests, moko offered permanence. And permanence mattered. Land wasn't just land, it was ancestor. Riverbeds were named after grandmothers. Trees carried the echo of tribal births and deaths. A moko didn't just say, "This belongs to me." It said, "This is me." Now here's a quirky tidbit. Moko artists called Tohunga Tamoko weren't just craftsmen. They were spiritual intermediaries. They didn't just carve skin. They translated genealogy into geometry. Some even fasted before a session. Others would refuse to perform moko during certain moon phases, believing the spiritual energy wasn't aligned. And still today, there's debate, were these marks entirely practical? Or did they carry hidden meanings known only to the wearer and their carver? Historians still argue whether moko were ever coded, with private legal clauses, secret agreements, etched into cheekbones readable only by those in the know. You pause now beneath the hanging strands of harakeke flax plants, swaying gently in the breeze. A young man, barely more than a teenager, stands before you preparing to receive his first lines. He's nervous. His eyes dart to yours. He wants this, not because it's fashionable, not even because his elders expect it, but because it means he belongs. It means the land recognizes him, that his body will carry not just blood, but proof of who he is. The Tohunga approaches. His kit is simple bone uhi, a pot of pigment, a small carved stool, and silence. No one talks during the first stroke. You watch as the chisel presses into skin, a thin line of red rising in its wake, then turning black as pigment is rubbed into the wound. It's slow, rhythmic, almost musical. The boy does not cry, but he flinches just once. You feel it in your teeth. There's something ancient about this pain, sacred pain, legal pain. By the time the first curl is complete, the sun has risen higher. Birds call in the bush. Someone begins a low chant. And beneath it all, you realize that line, the one just carved, is not a style, not an accessory. It's a sentence, a clause, a declaration, and it will never be erased. The sound is different now, less of a chant, more of a tap. A repetitive hollow tok-tok-tok echoing against carved timber walls as you crouch beside the Tohunga Tamoko. He's hunched over his latest canvas, a cheek partially inked trembling slightly beneath his grip. You watch as he dips the uhai, the chisel, into a dark, oily pigment. Then he taps again, not hurried, not gentle, but exact. Tok, tok, tok. You've seen tattoos before. You've probably got friends with entire sleeves or matching infinity signs behind their ears. But nothing has prepared you for this. This is surgery, sacred surgery, and there's no anesthetic here, just endurance and breath. You flinch when the bone blade slices again. The man receiving it, older than the teen you saw earlier, maybe a warrior or landholder, grits his teeth. A single tear slides from the corner of his eye. No one mocks him. In fact, no one even speaks. The whole room, if you can call it that, more like a carved shelter or huarenui, holds its breath. The Tohunga pauses to examine his line. Then, as if speaking to the air, "This ridge is for the Kanga taken back from Ngati Raukawa." And the chisel returns to work. You realize something: this face isn't just being marked, it's being notarized. The tools used for Moko are unlike anything you'd find in a tattoo shop. No buzzing coil machine, no sterilized steel needle. Instead, the yuhai comes in a set, flat-edged V-shape, sometimes serrated. The handles are often carved with intricate motifs, because even the tools have stories. They're made from albatross bone, or sometimes human. You're not sure which is more intense. Pigment is sacred too. Traditionally, it came from burned kauri resin kapia, or charred caterpillars infected by a fungus. Seriously. These would be ground to a fine soot and mixed with oil or animal fat. The darkest blacks came from the deepest burns, and they didn't just apply it. They rubbed it into open wounds. It hurts just thinking about it, doesn't it? Even your spine tightens a little. But here's the twist: Moko wasn't seen as suffering. It was seen as transformation. You were stepping into adulthood, into responsibility, into public visibility. The pain was the price of entry. Some Moko ceremonies lasted days, even weeks, broken up into sessions depending on the body part. You couldn't eat solid food while healing from face work. Your swollen lips made chewing impossible, so you drank thin soups through a gourd straw and tried not to drool in public. It wasn't glamorous. There's a quirky little historical note here. Early European visitors to Aotearoa, wide-eyed and musket-clutching, were horrified by the process. One sailor in the 18th century wrote that the sound of chisels on skin made him dizzy, and the smell of pigment gave him nightmares. Others predictably assumed it was barbaric, but their own culture at the time included powdered wigs, mercury medicine, and literal bloodletting, so let's not hand out judgment medals just yet. Still, they wrote about Moko obsessively. The first sketchbooks of Aotearoa are filled not with landscapes, but with faces. Specifically male faces, high-ranking chiefs, whose Moko glowed in the firelight like living signatures. And that's exactly what they were. The intricate curves on the forehead Ngakai Pikirau identified a man's genealogy. The lines under the nose Rarauhe often referenced social rank or leadership roles. Cheek markings Urewi could signify past conquests or lands defended. The Chintaiohu, arguably the most painful area, held the mark of the speaker. To bear Moko, there was to carry the right to speak for others in legal disputes that mattered. Let's say two tribes argued over a stretch of coastal land. No deeds, no satellite surveys, just memory and lineage. The tribe with the better documented ancestry, the better Moko evidence, often had the upper hand. Your skin said what your mouth didn't need to. Historians still argue whether Moko functioned as outright legal contracts. Were there symbols for specific rights, like fishing in certain bays? Could a particular curve grant authority over a PA-fortified village? The truth may lie somewhere in between. A Moko wasn't a document you filed, it was a status you lived. Now, step closer. The Tohunga finishes the cheek and shifts his focus to the brow. A light sheen of sweat glistens across the client's face, pigment catching in tiny rivulets. It stings. You can see it in his knuckles clenched in his lap. But still he does not move. This is for the line of chiefs from Taranaki, the Tohunga murmurs. Another tap, another mark, another scar, and suddenly you wonder who keeps track of all this. If Moko are legal declarations, who ensures their accuracy? Who cross-references these spirals with spoken wakapapa? That's where the Ware Wananga comes in, traditional houses of learning. You'll hear more about them later, but for now, just know. This oral historians in Maori culture are trained like memory athletes. They don't just memorize facts, they memorize genealogical arcs, battle orders, chants, laws, and stories. A moko isn't just verified by lines, it's backed by the voices of those who remember what those lines mean. You step back into the daylight, the smell of burnt pigment still clinging to your nostrils. The man with the new cheek spiral bows slightly in your direction, not for approval but for acknowledgement. He's different now. He is quite literally not the same man who walked in this morning. You stare at his face, not just with curiosity, but with the quiet respect you'd give to a signed constitution. It's permanent, it's public, and it's binding. And then, almost as an afterthought, you realize he never signed a thing. You're walking now slowly through a grove of ancient trees, their trunks wide enough to house an entire family meeting, their roots gnarled and exposed like the bones of the land. Each branch arches overhead like a ribcage of memory, and every gust of wind seems to whisper names you don't recognize. But the air here feels ceremonial, settled, legal even. Ahead of you stands a gathering not large, maybe a dozen or so people, barefoot and calm. At the center sits an elder woman, skin weathered like the bark of these old trees, and face adorned with a moko kauai so precise it looks like it's always been there. She's not speaking, but her presence fills the space. A few meters away, a young man kneels with his head bowed, flanked by two other elders, all in silence. You're witnessing a land matter, except there's no parchment, no seals, no table with pens, just people, memory, and skin. This is where you start to understand Tomoko isn't static. It doesn't just tell the story of a person, it holds weight in collective decisions. A moko can be invoked. It can be referenced, called into evidence, used as a claim. And in a time before codified laws or written records, this was more than symbolic, it was binding. You listen as the elder woman begins to speak. Her voice is slow, not frail, but deliberate. She names the river that runs beside the disputed land. Then the ancestor who first planted Kumara there. Then the night the earth shook and a landslide buried the path leading to the spring. Each story is marked not with dramatic flair, but with gentle certainty. She gestures once toward her moko, and the air seems too still. She's not stating an opinion. She's submitting evidence. You begin to see that a face like hers isn't just biographical, it's geopolitical. The spiral on her chin curves just so, mirroring a stream that's changed course 3 times in 100 years. The notch near her lip. That's the mark of the canoe her people arrived in generations ago from the east. And just under her lower lip, a tiny vertical line, probably unnoticed by most, might correspond to a land claim confirmed through marriage 2 lifetimes back. It's not that moko replace memory, it's that they reinforce it. When 2 tribes debated the boundaries of forest access, it wasn't just oral testimony that mattered. It was the collective memory paired with the visible truth. And that truth was worn proudly, painfully, permanently. There's a debate among anthropologists still unresolved about how precise these legal correspondences were. Some argue that moko served as general symbols, flexible and context-bound. Others claim there were specific motifs that acted as coded titles or land deeds. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Maybe every moko is a little like modern art, open to interpretation, but grounded in deep structure. You think back to something the chief said earlier, you can't lie with your face. And here it makes a certain legal sense. Forgery was nearly impossible. Copying a Moko design without the waka papa to back it up wouldn't just get you mocked, it could get you exiled, or worse. In some iwi, falsely wearing certain Moko was akin to treason. And because the carving process was so involved both physically and socially, you couldn't just commission a Moko on a whim. You needed standing, approval, ancestry, and in some cases, a whole ceremony involving food offerings, fasting, and incantations to your ancestors. It wasn't ink, it was legitimacy. And not just for men. Here's something that doesn't get enough airtime. Women's Moko weren't lesser, and they weren't ornamental. In many iwi, a woman's Moko kauai marked her as a bearer of knowledge, land rights, and sometimes spiritual leadership. Women without Moko might still hold mana, but those with kauai were public declarations of continuity. You look again at the woman before you. She's no less formidable than any warrior. She's just still, rooted, like the tree behind her. The crowd around her listens as the young man begins his reply. He doesn't raise his voice. He simply stands, showing the pattern on his upper arm, freshly inked, still slightly raw, and begins to trace his own wakapapa aloud. His story doesn't contradict hers, but it does extend it. He's not challenging her claim. He's layering it, adding nuance. And just like that, you understand Moko isn't about ending disputes. It's about giving them context. Your mind wanders briefly to your own world. Legal documents scanned PDFs, squinting through blurry receipts, clicking accept on a 38-page terms of service agreement you never read. Compare that to this: a face that holds land, a chin that remembers lineage, a cheek that testifies. You wonder what would happen if everyone you knew had to carry their entire resume on their skin. Not just achievements, but responsibilities, the things they owed, the people they descended from, their impact, their shame. It's a strange kind of intimacy, but here it works, because the community knows how to read it. And they don't just read with their eyes, they read with their ears, their memory, and their shared understanding. The elder woman finishes her speech with a gentle raising of her hand. She doesn't press her argument, she simply stands and steps back. And the meeting ends not with a verdict, not with a stamp, but with silence. Everyone seems to know what that silence means. As the group disperses, you glance back at her Moko one last time, and something in your gut tells you no matter what, that land will still be hers, even if no map ever says so. You return to the path winding slowly through the village as morning bleeds into a silver midday haze. Somewhere nearby, someone's pounding flax fibers with a smooth stone. Chickens dart across the clearing. You try not to trip over one. You can't stop thinking about the Moko. Not just what it represents, but how unforgeable it is. In a world where so much can be faked, signatures, photos, intentions, the idea of a document you can't reproduce without chisel blood, ancestry, and permission. Kind of brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. You pass a carved post, its face, fierce tongue, out eyes bulging with mana. Even that poo has marks. Not Moko exactly, but similar grooves, each carved with deliberation. You're beginning to realize the whole landscape is a document. Trees, rocks, faces, they're all part of the legal system here. And you wonder what happens if someone tries to fake it. Well, let's say you're a landless outsider. You've heard of a valley rich with kai and river eels. You want to claim it. But you have no wakapapa, no standing, no Moko. So what do? You try to cheat. You copy someone's facial lines, maybe even bribe a carver to inscribe them on your skin. Then you show up on the marae, announcing that you are of the same descent as those who hold rights to that place. Except you forgot something. Moko isn't just ink, it's biography. And this community, they remember things. They remember who your father was, Your grandmother's voice. The time your cousin tripped into the fire pit during a naming ceremony. You might wear the lines, but your story doesn't line up. Forgery is laughable here. In fact, the community would see your moko and know instantly that it's false. Not because the lines are wrong, though they probably are, but because you are not recognized. Your voice doesn't carry the echoes it should. They might not punish you with violence, but the exile would be swift, silent. You'd find yourself unacknowledged, invisible. And in a society built on recognition and connection, that's a fate worse than a trial. There's a fringe case scholars still debate, a rumor, half recorded by a settler in the 1840s, of a man who supposedly killed a high-ranking chief, flayed part of his moko-bearing skin, and wore it stitched into his own face as a disguise. Historians still argue whether it's apocryphal or true. Some say it was a cautionary tale. Others claim the record is distorted, filtered through colonial horror and embellishment. But regardless, the myth lingers like smoke. You can wear another's skin, but you can't fake their mana. And really, isn't that the point? Moko is unforgeable, because it's not just carved into you, it's lived by you. It reflects not just heritage, but actions. Land rights affirmed through service. Standing earned through responsibility. You don't inherit a moko, you grow into it. You pause to watch a group of children etching shallow lines into the mud, with sticks mimicking the moko patterns of their elders. One of them declares himself a chief, standing tall with a fern leaf tucked behind his ear. The others collapse in giggles, pointing out that his spirals look like squashed caterpillars. There it is again, the recognition. Even in play, the rules remain. They know who gets to wear what and why. Later, over a lunch of steamed kumara and roasted eel wrapped in leaves, you sit beside a man with a striking full-face moko. The spirals on his cheeks move as he smiles, and you finally get the courage to ask him quietly, what would happen if someone copied his design? He doesn't flinch. They'd be laughed out of the valley, he says, unless they could prove it. But proving it would mean being me. Same ancestors, same path, same scars. He points to his chest. This design here, that's my grandfather's paw site, the one I defended during the flood of 22. That swirl, my youngest daughter's stillbirth, she lived for 2 hours. That line over the eye, I put it there after losing a land case we should have won. Marked the injustice, carried it forward. He shrugs. You can steal patterns, but you can't steal pain. That one hits. You stare at the line above his eye. Just a curve. Simple, almost decorative. But now it pulses with meaning. The implications are dizzying. In this society, you can't separate identity from responsibility. You are what you've carried, what you've endured, what you've upheld. There's a softness in that, a kind of brutal honesty you don't see in most legal systems. No contracts written in loopholes, no obfuscation, just bone-deep biography. You lean back and look up at the sky, half hoping it might reveal some deeper code, some pattern to match the moko you've seen. But all you get are drifting clouds and the realization that some documents aren't written in ink or stone. They're written in flesh. And once written, they cannot be undone. You're back on the marae now, a wide-open courtyard flanked by wooden carvings and a Where-and-we whose walls breathe history. The air feels heavier here. Not oppressive, just serious. Like the hush that falls in a courtroom before the judge enters, only no one wears robes and the ceiling is made of woven flax and carved rafters instead of plaster and chandeliers. A small gathering begins to form. Men and women step forward, some in woven cloaks, others with bare feet and faces marked with moko. No microphones, no scrolling transcripts, just voices and skin. A dispute is about to be settled, and lucky you are here to witness a courtroom where the face is the evidence. The issue is about land, of course. Isn't it always a stretch of forest long claimed by one hapu, recently challenged by another? Not over boundaries, not even over resources. It's deeper than that, something about rightful stewardship and whether the original agreement made between two long-dead chiefs still holds weight now that their descendants have, let's just say, different opinions. The two parties stand across from each other, facing inward like the halves of a mirror, two histories preparing to argue their shape. There's no gavel, no opening remarks, just a silence that ripples through the crowd. And then a man steps forward. His moko glints in the light, especially the curves under his eyes, old lines worn but firm. He doesn't raise his voice. He begins to recite names, generations of them, grandfather, great-grandmother, uncle who died in the uprising of the 1830s, sister who planted the first taro in the disputed grove. His face matches his words. Every name, every role is confirmed in the spirals, ridges, and lines carved across his brow, nose, and chin. You don't need a spreadsheet to track his case. It's there before you, encoded in his skin. And then gently the other party steps forward. This speaker is younger, maybe your age. His moko is partial chin and upper lip marked, but his cheeks are bare. Maybe he's early in his journey. Maybe his full moko isn't earned yet, but his voice carries weight. He too recites wakapapa. But his story is different. A claim of marriage ties, a land exchange made generations ago to settle a blood debt. His moko, while not as full, holds two key marks, a thin twin line on the side of his jaw that you're told signifies a woman ancestor who died during childbirth, a death that once transferred land to the father's side. Historians still argue whether such marks were uniformly recognized across iwi, or if each hapu had its own visual dialect. Were there universal symbols for inheritance, or were they locally interpreted? The evidence is fragmentary, like trying to read laws from a puzzle with half the pieces underwater. Still, the debate continues, and you're now part of it, sitting quietly processing facial glyphs like a first-year law student at the Supreme Court. And here's where things get strange in a good way. The community begins to respond. One elder calls out from the side, referencing a carving in the Huaranui that backs one version of the story. Another hums softly, signaling agreement. No one yells. There are no objections shouted or points of order raised. But there's a rhythm to it all, a tempo that builds, shifts, then stills. It's like a haka made of logic. You realize that this isn't about winning. It's about restoring balance. Truth in this space isn't binary. It's layered. The goal isn't to defeat someone's claim, but to untangle the story until it aligns with memory, with land, with face. Eventually, a third speaker steps in. Not a direct stakeholder, but an elder woman with moko kawai so clean, so sharp, it looks like it was carved yesterday. She doesn't take sides. Instead, she narrates. She weaves both stories into one larger fabric, correcting where necessary, affirming where needed. And when she's done, everyone falls silent. She has no gavel, but the way she raises her chin might as well be one. No formal declaration is made, no case closed. Just a nod, a few murmured acknowledgments, and then slowly people begin to walk away. Dispute settled face to face, word to word, mark to mark. You blink. Did that really just happen? You're used to justice feeling cold, paper-heavy, procedure choked. This feels like memory put to work. No surprise witnesses, no court stenographers. just a collective act of recall carried by the people who wear the history on their skin. There's a fringe academic theory. You remember reading a niche article buried in an obscure journal. It claimed that the Maori legal system wasn't just oral, but somatic body-based. Not only did people remember laws through chants and stories, but their very bodies through moko became the law. You scoffed a bit when you read it, but now you're sitting cross-legged on a woven mat heart, thudding softly, watching a crowd quietly dissolve after reaching legal consensus without signatures, without law books, without litigation. Now it doesn't seem so fringe after all. A young child tugs at your sleeve. You turn. She holds up a strip of bark she's drawn on with charcoal, spirals, jagged lines, a smiling sun. Mine, she says, proudly tapping her chin. You smile. One day, maybe. One day she'll earn those marks for real. And when she does, the land will know her name, because it will already be written in her skin. You leave the marae behind your steps, quieter now. Not out of reverence, though there's plenty of that, but because something in you has shifted. You've stopped trying to categorize what you see. The moko aren't just marks anymore. They're alive. They interact. They carry the weight of generations, yes, but also moods, losses, joys, and a sense of place you've never quite encountered before. And now, as you wander toward the weaving huts near the edge of the pia, something catches your eye. A group of women is seated under a sloped awning of layered harakeke sunlight, filtered through its gaps, dappling their faces. They're working flax, stripping, softening, braiding, but it's not their hands you notice first. It's their faces, moko kawai, delicate lines traced along their chins and lower lips, some bold, symmetrical, others softer, tapering like brush strokes. None of them identical, but all resonant variations on a sacred theme. You sit cross-legged nearby, invited by a silent glance, and simply observe. There's a quiet power in these women. They don't talk much, but when they do, it's with purpose. Their moko seem to animate when they smile, as if the marks themselves are expressions, not just decorations. You'd heard before arriving here that moko kawai was lesser than full-face moko, that it was an echo of the male version. But the moment you saw the first woman tilt her chin upward with authority, that idea collapsed like an overcooked taro. Here, moko kawai isn't lesser, it's foundational. You learn slowly as the hours drift like mist that these marks often signified a woman's role in society as a teacher, a midwife, a spiritual guardian, or the holder of tribal memory. A moko kawai could announce that this woman had buried children, or survived a war, or protected lands in ways that no spear ever could. One elder, her moko, sharp as a shadow, looks up and tells you simply, "Our moko are not just permission to speak. They are the expectation to speak." It's a phrase you'll carry with you for years. You think about how, in many cultures, women are told to shrink themselves, speak less, defer. But here to wear moko kawai is to step forward, to be seen, to be recorded. In fact, during certain ceremonies, the first voice heard was often not that of a warrior, but a woman with kawai, because her face had earned it. You learn of another custom when tribal leaders gathered and male moko became the legal documents presented for negotiation. The women's moko kawai sometimes functioned as the margins, the clarifiers, the annotations. If a chief claimed too much, it was often the elder woman who would correct the narrative not by yelling but by standing. Her moko said more than her mouth ever needed to. And yet, despite this, there's silence in many books about moko kawai. Early colonial accounts often skipped them entirely. Female authority too subtle, too confusing. too threatening to European eyes, used to top hats and mustaches, making all the decisions. Even today, historians still argue whether women's moko carried the same legal weight as men's. Some say they were social spiritual but not transactional. Others insist they had equal bearing in land claims and leadership. The evidence is piecemeal, some passed down in chants, some in personal diaries, and some still alive on the faces of the great-grandmothers who walk among their great-granddaughters. You listen as one woman explains her moko's story. She received it after the death of her third child, not as a mourning symbol, but as a recognition that she had endured and remained. It was her community's way of saying, "You're not just surviving. You are part of us still. You are carrying this pain not for yourself, but for the generations who will ask you what courage looked like." She said the pain of the chiseling was nothing compared to the days after I buried her. You feel a weight settle in your chest. It's not sadness, it's depth. A quiet, endless depth. Later, another woman shows you her moko, then lifts her sleeve to reveal another on her upper arm hidden from most. She tells you this one was given in secret during a time when such things were discouraged. Not by her people, but by the government. You blink. She's talking about the 1900s, not ancient history, within her mother's lifetime. She explains that for decades, moko, especially moko kauai, was seen as backward, primitive, something to be discouraged in public, banned in schools, frowned upon in hospitals. There were attempts, subtle and not so subtle, to erase them. Women were told to scrub off their dignity, hide their heritage, smile nicely instead. But the moko stayed. Hidden, perhaps, dormant, but waiting. It's a strange thing watching someone wear rebellion on their face, not in defiance, but in pride. Quiet, grounded pride, not a fight, a fact. As the sun begins to set, casting golden fire through the trees, one of the younger women turns to you. Her moko is still healing, fresh, slightly raised. She smiles. Now when I look in the mirror, I see everyone behind me, and they're smiling back. You don't say anything, you just nod. Because really, what could you say? You look around one more time, trying to memorize every curve, every notch, every shadowed spiral. Not because you want to copy them, but because you want to remember what truth looks like when it's carried, not spoken. And just before you rise to leave, the elder with the sharp moko kawe says, without turning her head, words fade, paper burns, skin remembers, and somehow you sleep better that night than you have in weeks. You're dreaming, or maybe just walking in that sleepy in-between state, when the soft crunch of gravel and the smell of something foreign, burnt tobacco shoe polish, pulls you out of it. You're still in Aotearoa, yes, but something's changed. The birds sound wrong, the voices are clipped nasal, and there's a ship docked in the bay that wasn't there yesterday. Europeans have arrived. You've seen these people in textbooks. Wigs, waistcoats, scrolls of paper, and that unfortunate habit of renaming everything they touch. They don't wear moko. Their clothes are stiff and loud. They talk loudly too, as if volume is a substitute for understanding. One of them, a trader, maybe leans forward, squinting at a chief's face like it's a puzzle. Then he does something strange. He points, not at the eyes, at the chin. His lips move. Is that permanent? You don't hear the chief's answer. He doesn't need one. His moko glows in the sun, the raised ridges catching the light like embossed scripture. But the trader just keeps staring, like the chief's face is a curiosity, a relic. Maybe even God help us, a collectible. And that's when things start getting weird. Because the Europeans don't just want to trade muskets and tea. They want stories, faces. They want to own things. And some of them, colonial collectors, scientists, opportunists, decide they want the heads. Yes, heads. You're in the early 1800s now, and the collecting of toy moko tattooed, preserved heads has begun. At first they're taken respectfully. Chiefs who die are sometimes preserved by their people. The heads are treated with sacred care, smoked, oiled, and kept as taonga treasures. These weren't trophies. They were honored remains kept by families venerated like ancestral urns. But once Europeans realize they can be sold, everything changes. Toy moko become items, commodities, traded for guns, rum tools. The more intricate the moko, the more valuable the head. There are dark rumors, historians still argue over them, that some chiefs may have commissioned slaves or enemies to be tattooed and killed for profit. Others say this was colonial propaganda exaggerating rare abuses to justify British control. Either way, the result is the same, a grotesque trade in heads. And you standing here now can't stop imagining a face, once loved, once greeted with laughter, boxed in straw, labeled, and placed on a ship bound for London. Imagine seeing your ancestor's face behind museum glass. One of the most infamous cases involves a chief named Horomona. His moko was known across the land, distinctive ridges beneath his eyes, a curl along his temple. When he died, his head was preserved. Later, it disappeared. For decades, nothing. Then one day, it showed up in a European collection. No name, no context, just an item on a shelf. It would take over 100 years and a massive repatriation effort before some of these heads began returning to Aotearoa. Some still haven't. And here's the strange thing, the Europeans didn't understand what they were collecting. They saw art, exoticism, a thrill, but they missed the point entirely. These weren't just tattooed skulls. They were documents, legal, spiritual, personal. They held land rights, family trees, grief pride. A head in a jar wasn't just morbid, it was a stolen archive. And the theft still hurts. There's a moment you'll never forget. You're in a museum decades later, standing behind glass. And there it is, a head, real, preserved, and silent. The label calls it Maori tattooed head, 19th century, provenance unknown, unknown. You feel something hot in your chest. The moko is clear. It's not just art, it's language. It says something, and yet here it is reduced to 4 words and a question mark. That's when it hits you. You're staring at a stolen will, a carved contract, a displaced autobiography, and the silence feels like a scream. Back in the village, as the sun dips behind the hills, an elder speaks quietly to a child seated beside her. She's tracing a finger along her own moko kawe and whispering names, places, memories. You strain to listen. She says something like, "Let them take the paper, we have the skin." That night you don't sleep easily. You dream of moko glowing in the dark, of faces whispering in museums, of contracts signed in blood and unread by those who now hold them. And somewhere in the distance you hear the creak of shipwood, the soft roll of waves, and the echo of a deal made too fast with people who never really looked at what they were signing away. Morning, again, only now it smells different, less smoke, more soap. There's bread in the air, not the rich, sweet bread you're used to, but a flat, dry kind, uniform pail. You hear voices, English this time, not shouted, just firm, rehearsed, like someone trying to make a point without ever listening to the answer. You're standing at the edge of a crowd. They've gathered near the Wernui, but it's not a tribal meeting. This time it's a sermon. A man stands tall at the front, clean-shaven, buttoned collar, black jacket. In one hand a book, in the other a small wooden cross. His mouth moves with precision, words spilling out in carefully structured patterns. He's not speaking Maori. He's speaking at Maori. You glance around. A few people nod. Some listen quietly, but others look down at their feet, their moko, because today something is changing. The missionaries have arrived. They came with their Bibles, their songs, their medicine, and their judgment. And they didn't just disapprove of warfare or polygamy or indigenous gods. No. One of their deepest discomforts, moko. To them it was barbaric, primitive, ungodly, a disfigurement of the temple of the Lord. And so they began the campaign not just to convert, but to erase. They told chiefs to put down the chisel, told young women that moko kauai was shameful, whispered that marked skin would keep them from salvation, and over time those whispers took root. You watch as a teenage girl lowers her head, rubbing her chin as if to hide the beginnings of a moko. Her mother beside her wears one proudly, but her lips are pressed into a line. There's a slow tension here, a generational fracture, a question rising like steam. What if being accepted by the newcomers means rejecting who you are? And here's the cruel irony. The missionaries, so horrified by moko, also documented it obsessively. They wrote journals, drew sketches, translated tribal disputes because the moko made lineage so visible. They wanted to abolish the tradition but couldn't look away. Some even wrote that they felt sickened by the sight of a woman in mourning receiving a new chin tattoo. One diary entry described it as a descent into savagery. Another called the practice the devil's signature. Charming. Still not everyone resisted. Some Maori saw conversion as a tool, a new political language, a way to negotiate with colonizers to gain trade access, to protect land through clever alliances. They took the cross but not the amnesia. Others, they saw the writing on the wall. Literally, churches were being built where sacred trees once stood. Laws were being passed. New Zealand was shifting from a land of moko to a colony of documents signed, stamped, and stored in filing cabinets, far from the marae. One chief, Honeheke, famously cut down the British flagpole 4 times. Some say his moko flared with anger each time he raised his axe. He saw what was coming, knew that flags like missionaries were not just symbolic, they were signals of ownership. Here's a detail they don't teach in most schools. Even as European laws crept in, many Maori continued to use moko as binding evidence. There are stories, half-whispered, barely documented, of land disputes, settled not in court but in late-night meetings where elders unveiled old chins, letting the spirals speak. But over time, pressure grew. The colonial government didn't outright ban moko, not officially. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they undermined it, replaced it with written deeds, required signatures, passed laws that made uncivilized people suspect, and so moko slowly became inconvenient. You pass a row of school children reciting English lessons. The teacher walks between rows, adjusting collars, correcting posture. One boy has a faint chin mark, barely visible, but the teacher scolds him anyway, makes him scrub it with soap until the skin is raw. Not because it's dangerous, because it's different. There's a story, hard to confirm but heartbreakingly repeated, of a girl in the 1920s who received her moko kauai in secret. She was beaten at school the next day, not for misbehaving, just for existing in a way that didn't match the rule book. You watch these moments like scenes in a slow, soft apocalypse. A carving house that no longer echoes with chisel taps. A tohunga who puts away his tools. A girl who practices her whakapapa in English now because that's what's expected. And always the missionaries smiling tightly, believing they've saved something. Historians still argue about the impact. Were the missionaries intentionally erasing identity, or just caught in their own worldview? Did they destroy Moko culture, or just bury it? But here, watching this young girl scratch at her chin, you realize it doesn't matter what they meant. The scars are the same. As the sermon ends, the crowd disperses. You notice one old man sitting at the edge of the gathering, his Moko, still proud and deep. A missionary approaches him with a pamphlet. He doesn't look up, doesn't move, just keeps sharpening a wooden spear, slow and steady. The pamphlet falls to the ground, unread, and for a moment you feel something rise in your chest. Not anger, not grief, just a quiet certainty. They can try to erase what's written in ink, but they will never erase what's carved into bone. The wind changes again. There's a tightness in the air now, not from weather but from process. You hear shuffling paper, stiff boots on wooden floors, the sharp snap of ink pens dipped and re-dipped. The landscape hasn't changed. There's still flax and bush and soft birdsong in the distance, but you can feel it. This world is starting to translate itself, and not always accurately. You're seated outside a small colonial office building, unpainted wood, one flag. A sign in 2 languages, though the Maori half seems to have been scratched in afterward, like a concession. Inside, a clerk is reviewing land deeds. You can hear him from here reading aloud Section 12B, signed by Waite. Signed by whom? He doesn't recognize the name. Not surprising. It's a transliteration of a tribal name, probably spelled wrong by someone who didn't care or couldn't hear it right the first time. But you do recognize something else, a name you know once had a Moko. A chief who stood with his chin raised and his face shining with lines that announced his authority to the world. Now his name is just scrawled ink. No Moko, no ceremony, just a page in a folder. This is where the damage starts to feel surgical. The colonial system doesn't strike with brute force, not yet. It creeps, it organizes, it paperizes everything. Chiefs are told to sign documents they can't read. Translators soften key words or omit clauses. Signatures are demanded, but what's a signature in a world where the face was once the proof? There's one moment you'll never forget. A chief arrives with his Moko as his seal. He places his face before the clerk, a living document. The clerk smiles politely and hands him a pen. You want to scream. It's not just disrespect. It's a full rejection of the concept of Moko as legal testimony. The colonizers do not see the face as valid evidence. They want written contracts, initials on lines, names that fit neatly into alphabetical registers. They want a system that they can control. And Moko is too wild, too personal, too old, and yet it persists. You hear of a case early 1870s where a dispute arises over a parcel of land near Rotorua. The colonial court demands a deed. The Iwi elders arrive instead, with 5 men each wearing full facial Moko, each able to recite the whakapapa that proves their standing. The court records the event. The judge listens, then rules against them. The reason, no written signature. This is how theft begins, not with force, but with format. Land is lost, not because it is taken, but because the evidence used to defend it is disqualified. Moko is not seen as legal. Oral memory is considered unreliable. Ceremony is labeled superstition. Imagine testifying in court and being told your entire body of proof is irrelevant. It happens again and again, and the worst part, it works. Between 1840 and 1900, millions of acres of Maori land are transferred to the crown or settlers. Some of it is sold willingly, strategically even. but much of it lost in translation, or rather lost because of the refusal to translate, lost because what had once been carved in flesh is now being replaced by ink on British parchment. There's a fringe theory whispered among cultural historians that some Tohunga Ta Moko began to update Moko in response to these changes, adding marks to reference legal battles, failed court cases, or land lost. Not all agree. Some say this is retroactive storytelling. Others believe these updates were subtle internal, a kind of resistance through skin. You like that idea. You hope it's true. You follow an older woman walking out of the clerk's office now. Her moko kawai is faint, sun-faded perhaps, but still clear. She walks slowly, but not sadly. You watch her pass a group of younger women, none of whom wear moko. They nod respectfully, but they do not lift their chins. Not yet. There's an ache in the silence that follows her, a soft question hanging in the air. If the face no longer holds legal weight, then what happens to the generations who no longer carry it? You find yourself staring into a polished window. Your own reflection, plain, undecorated, looks back, and for a moment you imagine lines spiraling up from your jaw, across your cheek, over your brow. Would the world see you differently? Would you see yourself differently? Because that's the thing, moko was never just for others. It wasn't a flag you waved, it was a mirror you earned. And now, under the pressure of colonial law, that mirror is cracking, but not shattering. Some still wear it. Quietly, proudly, like legal testimony tucked into every step. They know what their skin says, even if the courts pretend not to hear. You're standing in a crowd again this time, near a long wooden table draped in white cloth, perched awkwardly on the grass near the sea. The breeze carries a strange mix of sea salt and old ink. Around you, chiefs gather. Some wear cloaks, some wear waistcoats, some carry staffs. Others stand bare-chested beneath moko that seem to vibrate in the light. And at the center of it all, a document. You recognize it immediately. The Treaty of Waitangi, February 6, 1840. A day that will become many things, a national holiday, a legal cornerstone, a source of endless debate. But today, it's just a table, a pen, and two languages staring at each other across a translation gap big enough to sink a fleet. You shuffle closer. The British officials are composed, polished boots, neat handwriting, confident in their definitions of things like sovereignty and governance. The Maori chiefs, meanwhile, have brought something very different. They've brought their moko. You watch as one chief stands tall, chest rising. His moko is dazzling, symmetrical, deep, unmarred. He doesn't speak. He presents himself. In his face is his land, his wakapapa, his mana. When he nods, it is as if 1,000 ancestors nod with him. Then comes the paper. They ask him to sign. He doesn't write. Instead, he asks that his moko be copied, drawn with ink and quill as his signature. The scribe obliges, sketching the lines slowly, like someone trying to trace a river from memory. That drawing will become a legal signature. His face becomes his written consent. And this is the part that sticks in your throat. Did he really know what he was signing? The treaty exists in two versions, English and Maori, and they don't say the same thing. In English, the chiefs are said to cede sovereignty to the British Crown. In Maori, the term used is kawanatanga, a word that implies governance or oversight, not ownership. Meanwhile, the Maori version promises to protect Tino Rangatiratanga, full chiefly authority over lands Taonga and all treasured things. So did they sign away everything, Or did they believe they were agreeing to partnership? Historians still argue fiercely. Some say it was deliberate deception. Others insist it was a tragic misunderstanding. But most agree on this: the chiefs who signed with their moko did not believe they were surrendering their authority. You glance at the treaty again now, just ink on aging paper. But in your mind you see it as something else, a kind of translation error in flesh. A misalignment between skin and ink. A handshake where one party wore a glove and the other offered a scar. Some of the chiefs hesitated. Some refused entirely. Others were persuaded by missionaries or trade promises. Still others, historians suspect, simply wanted peace, a respite from intertribal wars, a future for their mokopuna. And for a time, it worked. Sort of. But the years that followed weren't filled with partnership. They were filled with purchase, dispossession, land courts, settler expansion, and all of it backed not by faces or chance, but by documents, in English, enforced by colonial law. You wonder what happened to those chiefs' moko after they signed. Did the ink sketch preserve their authority, or did it reduce it to decoration? One scholar calls the treaty a mirror with two faces. Another calls it a legal illusion. But you can't stop thinking of it as a page that never deserved to replace a chin. Because here's the thing, that chief's moko still exists. Not physically, he's long gone, but in the carvings, in the wakapapa, in the chants. His descendants still carry his lines, his story, his decision. Some agree with it, some don't. But none of them have forgotten it. And perhaps that's the point. The treaty didn't end moko. It didn't erase it. But it muted, it pushed it to the margins of legality, made it a cultural thing instead of a legal one. And yet, it never stopped being law for those who wore it. As the ceremony ends and the officials begin folding their papers, you look around the gathering. Some chiefs are smiling, others are stone-faced. One kneels beside a small fire, whispering something into the smoke. His moko is only half finished. He didn't sign. You want to ask why, but you don't, because you already know the answer. It's not that he refused the idea of peace. It's that he refused to trade his skin for ink. You're standing in a room that doesn't breathe. The walls are pale and cold. The glass is thick. The light is artificial, and everything smells faintly of dust and disinfectant. You could be in any European museum, London, Paris, Berlin. It doesn't matter. The feeling is the same clinical awe. Silence, not from reverence, but from sterility. And then you see it, a head, just sitting there, behind glass, on a plinth padded with velvet, labeled with 5 words and a catalog number. Tattooed Maori head, 19th C. No name, no story, no wakapapa. The moko is unmistakable, elegant, precise, traced across the jaw and up toward the ear. It's a tamoko, clear as daylight, but the skin is darkened, stretched in preservation. You don't want to look, but you can't look away. This isn't a mask. It's not a carving. It's a person. And suddenly it hits you. You're standing in front of a document displayed as a curiosity, a legal identity, a declaration of lineage, sovereignty, responsibility turned into a specimen. There are more. Some in drawers, some in storage, some reportedly still in private collections, hoarded by antique dealers like war medals. For decades, these toy moko were bought, sold, stolen, traded, swapped for muskets, gin, silverware, tobacco, turned into tokens, conversation pieces. You'd like to think it was all accidental, that no one meant to strip these heads of their dignity. But then you read the archives, letters from collectors who describe the moko with chilling fascination. One man in the 1860s called them the most exquisite primitive etchings known to man. Another bragged that his collection had 7 different tribal patterns, not faces, patterns. Historians still argue whether some of the toy moko were made intentionally for trade, whether certain captives were marked and killed to meet European demand. Some dismiss it as colonial myth-making, just another excuse to demonize. Others point to diary entries, sale records, and oral histories that say otherwise. What's clear is the meaning of moko was desecrated, reduced to art, decapitated from context. And when the collecting stopped, the silence remained. For years, the toy moko sat in back rooms. Some were even forgotten. Museums knew they had them, but didn't know what to do with them. They didn't belong in anthropology, didn't quite fit with archaeology, and yet no one could deny they were something. Eventually, in the late 20th century, Maori leaders began to speak calmly, clearly, forcefully. Bring them home. It wasn't easy. Some institutions refused. Others agreed, but slowly. There were meetings, letters, legal wrangling. It wasn't just about boxes on ships. It was about acknowledgement, about recognizing that these weren't specimens. They were people, ancestors. Wanao, you're now witnessing one such repatriation. A crate is opened. Slowly, reverently. Inside, wrapped in fine cloth, is a head, a toy moko. You notice everyone standing. No one speaks. No one breathes heavily. A karanga begins soft rising from the back of the room, like the voice of the land itself. Women call to the ancestors. Men respond in low, rhythmic chants. The head is lifted not by gloves and tongs, but by careful, loving hands. It's going home. There's a scholar beside you. He's spent decades tracing the roots of these moko across continents. He leans in and whispers, "Each one that returns is a story made whole again." You nod. You don't speak, because what is there to say? You think about how absurd it would be if someone tried to bury a passport in a museum. How ludicrous it would be to put a birth certificate under glass and call it an art piece. And yet, here you are, a face meant to guide, to speak, to lead, turned into a mute relic, now finally returning to the soil that once called it Rangatira. Later, back in Aotearoa, the community gathers to bury the head. Not rebury, bury, because it had never been laid to rest before, just kept, like a thing. The chants rise again. The moko, even in decay, is visible, and as the soil covers the crate, you realize something profound. No one here is crying, not because there is no grief, but because the return is correction. A legal document misplaced has now been refiled. A soul has come home. You walk along a ridge now, above the bushline, where the wind whips through your hair, and the ground crunches underfoot with lichen-covered stone. Below, valleys unfold like woven cloaks, patterns of forest and farmland, scars of roads, winding through what used to be whole. It's quiet, but it's not empty. Somewhere beneath these hills, the last Tohunga Tamoko put down their chisels. You feel the silence of that moment, not explosive, not dramatic, just gradual, like a candle flickering out when no one's watching. You try to picture it, a carver with rough hands, long gone gray, his pigment pot empty, his apprentices scattered, some to war, others to factories. The moko patterns he once memorized now fading in the corner of his mind. He doesn't say he's done. He just doesn't pick up the uhai the next day. This is what it means for a tradition to disappear, not in flames, but in forgetfulness. As the 20th century rolls in, moko fades from view, not completely, but enough to make space for the question, What happens when the people forget how to speak their own skin? Young people grow up without it, not because they choose not to, but because the option no longer exists. You meet one of them. He's older now, silver at his temples, but he remembers the confusion, watching the elders, hearing whispers about Moko, but never being told what it truly meant. They said it was gone, he tells you, that we didn't do that anymore. He shrugs. I believe them. So instead of chisels and chants, he was taught how to hold a pencil sign, his name, pass an exam. All good things, but none of them his things. He lifts a photo from his pocket, black and white, curled at the edges. It's his grandmother's face, unmarked. He says she wanted a Moko Kauai, but no one knew how to give her one, and she wouldn't let it be done with a needle. If it's not a chisel, she'd say it's not real, and so she died without it. You feel that like a bruise in the chest. It's not just the loss of art, it's the loss of permission. Without the tohunga who holds the memory, without the pattern who holds the claim, there's a fringe story you overhear in a remote village, almost a ghost story. It's about a young man in the 1950s who tried to give himself a moko using a sharpened nail and soot. He only managed 2 lines. His grandmother, they say, cried not because he did it, but because no one stopped him to teach him how. Even when people tried to revive the tradition, they were met with obstacles, legal ones, cultural ones. In 1907, the New Zealand Parliament passed the Tohunga Suppression Act, a law that, while officially targeting charlatans, ended up silencing many legitimate cultural practitioners. Tohunga Tamoko were among them. The law didn't say no moko, but the chilling effect was real. If your grandfather gave someone a traditional mark, was he a carver or a criminal? Historians still argue how deeply the law damaged the moko tradition. Was it the final blow or just another nail in the coffin? Either way, the result is clear. By the mid-20th century, the line of carvers had thinned dangerously. You look at your own hands now, they're unmarked, smooth, not blank, but unstoried. And suddenly you feel how quiet skin can be when it forgets what to say. But just when you think the story is over, something stirs. You meet her at the edge of the village. She's small, sharp-eyed, holding a box. Inside tools, old ones, an uhi carved from whalebone, a pigment pot sealed tight with resin, a set of drawings, some faded, some fresh, and at the bottom, wrapped in linen, a journal. It's not in English, it's not even in modern Maori. The language is older, ceremonial, but the diagrams clear as day. Chin spirals, brow ridges, patterns for men, for women, for mourning, for leadership. This isn't just art, it's a manual. She's not a tohunga yet, but she wants to be. She's been tracing lines on paper since she was a girl, studying the curve of her grandmother's jaw, the way her ancestors posed in faded photos. She speaks slowly with precision. I don't want to replicate, I want to restore. You ask if anyone's teaching her. She smiles almost shyly. Some of the knowledge never left. It just went quiet. Later, you see her draw a line across her own arm. Just ink. A test. But it looks right. The line is deliberate, not decorative, not cute. It says, I remember. And in that moment, the silence of the last tohunga doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a pause, a breath, before the chisel taps once more. It's the 1990s now. You're on a street corner in downtown Auckland. Neon signs buzz overhead, and a faint smell of fish and hot oil wafts from a kebab stand. The city pulses with movement buses, groaning past teenagers laughing too loudly, and above it all, a bus line thumping from a passing car window. And then he walks by. Black hoodie, skateboard tucked under one arm, and etched into his chin, a moko. Not a costume, not a gang tag, a real moko kawaii. You blink. Did you just imagine it? But no, another turns the corner. A woman, early 20s, sharp brow, earbuds in face, calm and fierce. Her moko curves across her lower lip in a pattern you've only seen in old black and white photos. She nods at someone across the street. He nods back. Both marked. You're witnessing the revival, not in a museum, not in a dusty archive, in traffic, in motion, in life. It began slowly, tentatively in the late 20th century. A few brave souls, tired of waiting for permission, chose to carry moko once more. Some were elders reclaiming old traditions. Others were activists, students, artists, musicians. Each line they bore was both remembrance and resistance. The old rules still there, but updated, translated, the U-Hai reimagined with modern tools in some cases. The pigment safer, but the process, the deliberation, the why, remained sacred. You sit now in a tattoo studio, not the kind with flash designs and sleeveless metalheads, but one painted in soft earth tones, walls lined with carvings. The artist wears gloves, yes, but also a cloak over her shoulders. Her station smells not just of antiseptic, but of burning herbs. On the table before her, a young man, shirt off, calm, focused. She's tracing a design across his shoulder, based on his iwi, his wakapapa, his intention. Not aesthetic, not trend. Story. You watch her pause before each stroke. She explains every curve. This line is your mother's river. This shape, this was your uncle's role at the PIA. You said you want to teach, so this spiral curves toward your mouth. He nods, doesn't speak. Then the needle begins. Yes, needle, not a chisel. And for some purists, this is still a point of contention. Historians, carvers, elders, they debate. Can it still be moko if it's done with a machine? Some say yes, it's the intention that matters. Others insist that only the chisel, the uhi, carves the spiritual layer. The argument isn't settled. Maybe it never will be. But in this room, as the hum begins, there's no confusion. Something sacred is happening. You learn that this wave, the Tia Moko revival, is more than personal. It's political. In the 1980s and 90s, Maori activists began reclaiming not just moko, but language land education. They demanded treaty settlements, cultural recognition, and moko became a visible declaration of that movement. Not everyone approved. Some media outlets called it confrontational. Others accused wearers of being intimidating. You find old headlines that read, "Face tattoos in the workplace, should we be concerned?" But slowly things changed. In 1996, a woman named Ngahuia Te Awekutuku, an academic activist and artist, received her moko kawaii and became one of the most visible leaders of the revival. Her face became a statement not of rebellion but of truth. Her presence forced the nation to reckon with what had been buried. You watch a recording of her speaking. Our moko are not graffiti. They are not trends. They are not tribal tattoos. They are our contracts with the world. And just like that, you realize the chisel may pause, the pigment may fade, but the message, it doesn't die. You walk through a university campus. A lecturer enters the room, young, proud moko kawaii visible. She begins her lesson in Te Reo Maori. Some of the students are Pākehā non-Maori. They listen, they learn, they do not look away. In another corner of the city, a hip-hop group takes the stage. Their beats are modern, but their verses are laced with old stories. One wears a moko that pulses under stage lights. The crowd shouts his wakapapa with him. Not just pride, belonging. You attend a graduation ceremony at a kura kaupapa, an immersion Maori school. One by one, the graduates walk the stage. Some have moko kauai. Some have small designs along their forearms. But they all walk with their chins lifted. And you find yourself exhaling deeply, gratefully, because what you're witnessing isn't just cultural. It's legal memory resurfacing through skin. A face can once again carry weight, not just spiritually, but publicly, politically. It's not about going backward. It's about going inward, then forward. You meet a man who received his moko after fighting for water rights in his rohe. He calls it my signed affidavit. Another, a lawyer, wears hers to court. Sometimes she says the judge won't look me in the eye, but they can't not see me. You ask what she means. She taps her chin. This is my legislation. You didn't expect to end up at a fashion show, but here you are backstage in a converted Ware Nui, where the air smells like hairspray and harakeke. Spotlights cut stripes across the ceiling. Models shuffle past with bare feet and cloaks that gleam with woven metallic thread. And on their faces, moko, not painted, not for show, real, permanent. You blink, wondering for a moment if this is some kind of performance. If the moko are temporary, if the runway lights are just echoing the old stories without really understanding them. But then you meet her. She stands near the mirror. Tall, centered, calm. Her moko kauai is bold, symmetrical, glowing faintly under the backstage light. She's not dressed like anyone else here. No elaborate design, no stylized headwear. Just a clean black dress and a single silver heitiki hanging from her neck. She turns slightly, sees you watching, and smiles. "Don't worry," she says. "It's not for fashion." You stammer a reply. She shrugs. "It's here on the runway because it's everywhere now. And it's not going anywhere." You sit in a corner and watch the show unfold. There's something surreal about it. Haka rhythms layered under synth beats, models striding with pride, not in high heels, but barefoot. Some of them have moko on their thighs, some on their backs. One young man walks with a moko stretching across his chest, his heart outlined in ink, and the crowd, they're not gasping, they're not whispering, they're nodding. Some are crying, because they know this isn't spectacle, it's declaration. Once the moko was for the marae, for the battlefield, for sacred spaces and sacred moments. But now it's in Parliament, on TikTok, at the checkout line, on the subway, and yes, on the runway. You meet the designer afterward. She's Maori, of course. She gestures to the models with a look of awe. "This," she says, "is intergenerational healing. My grandmother was afraid to wear her moko kauai. My daughter got hers at 21. You ask if she worries about appropriation, about the moko becoming aestheticized. She nods, solemn. "Yes, I worry, but I also know moko knows how to protect itself." You don't quite understand, so she explains the lines are never random. You can't just take them. You can't wear them without meaning. They'll resist you. And that's the difference between cultural expression and cultural theft. Moko won't stay where it's not earned. She points at one model face, shining eyes fierce. That moko, it's her thesis, her wakapapa, her mother's miscarriage, her own sobriety. It's more than design. And you feel it again, that shiver down the spine. That moment when skin stops being just skin and becomes a sentence. There's a scholar in the front row. You recognize him from a documentary. He once described moko as non-verbal autobiography. He's leaning forward in his seat, scribbling notes, glasses slipping down his nose. But honestly, there's not much to analyze here. You just have to witness it. The final walk begins. All the models step out together side by side, not in a single file. The music drops to a heartbeat. A child's voice begins reciting a waka papa. No spotlight singles them out. Their moko do that for them. You remember how it used to be chiefs standing on earth floors, moko lines flickering in firelight, disputes settled face to face, chins that held titles, cheeks that told treaties. And now that same authority steps forward in strobe light, in cameras, in applause. It's not nostalgia, it's reclamation. And here's the twist you didn't see coming. Moko is not just about looking back. It's about showing up right now, fully present, unmissable. In a world that still tries to ignore indigenous presence, Moko says, I am here. I always was. You just forgot how to see me. You walk home that night differently. Every face you pass, you wonder what would that person's skin say if it could speak. Would their chin carry their mother's song? Would their forehead trace their migration? Would their cheeks carry lost court battles or hard-won peace? And then you glance in a shop window, just your reflection, plain, soft, unmarked. But now you don't see a blank canvas. You see a face that hasn't spoken yet, and beneath the skin you feel it, the drumbeat, the readiness, the map beginning to glow. You're at the airport. Fluorescent lights buzz above you. An announcement blares about gate changes and delayed flights. You shuffle forward, in-line passport in hand shoes, half-off body slowly dissolving into the sluggish gray rhythm of modern international travel. Then you see him. Just ahead of you in the security line, a Maori man, probably in his 40s, neatly dressed, calm, face unmistakable, a full moko kanohi. It's bold and beautiful, spirals across his cheeks, curves climbing his temples, lines carved in confidence, not confrontation. His posture is relaxed, but you can see it in his stance. He's done this before. The agent calls him forward, and then it happens. They pause. Not long, just that breath-long hesitation. The flick of a glance between coworkers, the subtle straightening of the spine, the sharpening of the tone. Sir, can you step aside, please? He doesn't flinch. He nods calm, like a man who's navigated this maze before, like someone who has become, over time, a walking confrontation between systems. You know the agent doesn't mean harm, but you also know what they see. Not the moko's meaning, just its visibility. You edge forward within earshot. The man explains again patiently, yes, the tattoos are real. No, he's not affiliated with a gang. Yes, this is cultural. Yes, it's traditional. No, he's not angry. No, it's not temporary. No, it's not just art. Yes, he finally says with a dry smile, I can show you my passport photo. And no, it doesn't wash off. You can almost feel the weight of that last sentence land like a stone on the linoleum floor. Because here's the truth, every time he steps into an airport, he's carrying two documents, one in his hand, one on his face, and only one is ever truly understood. Historians argue about how moko is treated by institutions outside Aotearoa. Is it honored, misunderstood? Feared, turned into otherness by systems built to prioritize sameness? You watch the agent soften, now nod hand back the documents. Thank you for your patience, they say. But of course, he always has to be patient. That's the quiet tax of wearing visible identity in a system built on invisible assumptions. You catch up to him later near the cafe. You hesitate, then speak. Do they always stop you? He smiles again, tired, not unkind. Not always, but often enough that I'm never surprised. You sit. He gestures toward his moko. "This," he says, tapping his cheek, "this is my boarding pass. It tells people where I'm from, who I belong to, and why I deserve to walk anywhere in this world with my chin up." You ask if it's ever exhausting. He pauses, then shrugs. It's not moko that's exhausting. It's explaining moko to people who won't listen. He sips his tea. But it's worth it. Every child who sees me walk through security without apologizing, that's worth 1,000 sideways glances. You think about the power of that, of being both target and trailblazer, of letting the world learn slowly through your face, of being willing to endure ignorance not because you want to, but because others need to see you stand through it. You remember a conversation from days earlier. An elder had said, "When they won't read your books, show them your skin." And this man is doing exactly that. Moko isn't a protest. It's a presence, not an argument, a fact. He tells you he once gave a keynote at an international conference on indigenous rights. At lunch, a delegate from Europe leaned over and asked if the markings were part of his costume. He laughed, then spent the next hour explaining lineage, land, and law. I used to resent that, he admits, but now I just see it as another form of teaching. Moko starts the conversation. You ask if it ever ends. He shakes his head. No. And I hope it never does. Your flight is called. He stands, adjusts his coat. You walk together toward the gate, side by side. One of you with a passport stamped in ink, the other with a face that will never expire. Now you're walking in protest. Not the loud kind. Not angry mobs or tear gas or chanting slogans until your throat gives out. This is a march of moko, a slow, deliberate procession winding through the center of Wellington. The air is still the ground, thick with footsteps that echo louder than shouting ever could. Banners rise above heads, some handwritten, others printed with bold type, but all of them carry the same message. We were never silent. You just refused to listen. And beneath those banners' faces, dozens, hundreds, young and old, moko kawai and full kanohi, some fresh, still healing, others worn smooth by years of sun and weather and experience. There's pride here, but not arrogance, grief, but not helplessness. Each person is a walking affidavit. You're not here as an outsider anymore. You walk within the rhythm now, a heartbeat of remembrance and resistance. You pass a mother carrying her toddler in a woven sling, her moko kawai bright in the sun. Her child reaches up and touches it, not with curiosity, but with familiarity, like it's home. You remember something the lawyer told you back in court. This is my legislation. And now you see it again repeated across every cheekbone, brow ridge, and chin. The cause today, freshwater rights. A new law has been proposed, one that would grant development companies easier access to riverways long held sacred by certain iwi uwi. The legal language is technical cold. It speaks of resource reallocation and infrastructure advancement. But here, walking beside you, is someone who wears the Waikato River on his skin. It curls along his jawline, rendered in delicate ripples and ridges. He turns to you and says softly, "They're not just taking water. They're taking the names, the memories, the bloodlines that sat beside that river before it had a name on a Western map." You don't respond. There's nothing to say. This isn't a metaphor to him. It's not even politics. It's ancestry. And that's the thing that colonial law still struggles to grasp. For Maori, land isn't property, it's kin. Water isn't a resource, it's a grandparent. Mountains are not obstacles to build around, they're elders who watch. So when someone with a moko shows up at a council meeting or stands before parliament or walks through city streets in protest. They're not wearing opinion. They're wearing history. You glance at a woman standing quietly near the back of the crowd. Her moko is minimal, just two small curves beneath her bottom lip. She doesn't speak, doesn't wave a sign. But when the photographers come, they gravitate toward her. Her silence is thunderous. And then something strange happens. A man across the street, shirt and tie, takeaway coffee in hand, laughs. You catch it mid-breath, a muttered joke to his friend. You don't hear the whole thing, but you know that tone. Dismissive, disbelieving, as if this procession is a costume parade, as if the moko are cosmetic choices, as if the grief and strength being walked into the pavement aren't real. The woman doesn't react, but the moko on her chin seems to deepen just slightly. That's the power of moko. It absorbs disrespect and reprocesses it into clarity. The movement continues. It winds past government buildings, past old statues erected for men who never walked this land with bare feet, past the museum where decades ago a toy moko was returned in a wooden crate with a government seal and an apology letter. You pass that building and you see a child press her fingers to the glass. Inside, she sees a photo of a woman with moko kauai. The caption calls her a leader of the revival. But you can tell by the way the child leans forward that she's not reading the caption. She's reading the face. And when she turns to her mother and asks, "Can I have one too?" that's the moment. That's the moment the protest becomes something else. It becomes instruction. You reach the final gathering point, an open field near a courthouse. There's no stage, no speeches, just a circle. Elders begin to chant. The air stills. And then one by one, those with moko step forward. They don't shout, they show. Each face speaks for a waterway, a hill, a grove, a family. You realize this isn't a march for change. It's a reminder that nothing ever stopped. The laws written in moko were never repealed. They were just ignored, and now they're back. Not in books, not in petitions, in skin, in the spiral of a cheek, the firmness of a jaw, the glint in the eye of someone who will not apologize for wearing their memory. You leave the field differently. Not as someone who observed a movement, but as someone who witnessed a library open its doors again. You're sitting in a tiny kitchen now. The steam from a chipped mug of tea curls around your face like a lazy mist. The light above the table flickers with a faint buzz. Across from you, an old man stirs sugar into his cup with the patience of someone who no longer hurries for anyone. You're here for stories, but what he offers isn't a tale, it's a question. Do you think we ever stopped wearing moko? Or did the world just stop looking? You let the question hang. Behind him, the wall is covered with photos, black and white ones, of people with unsmiling eyes and neat haircuts. Some with faint marks on their chins that you now realize were more than shadows. Others show protests, meetings, tangihanga. And in the center, a younger version of the man, moko, vivid eyes sharp. He sips. Even when we stopped carving it, he says we never forgot how it felt. The weight of it, the silence of it. You ask him what he means by silence. He nods like he was expecting the question. Moko doesn't shout. It just is. But people forget how to listen to things that don't yell. Then he leans in and lowers his voice like he's telling you something sacred. Even now, with all the revival, do you think everyone really understands? Or are we still trying to explain it in ways that aren't ours? That's where the debates begin. Academic circles, cultural forums, iwi meetings, they're full of questions. Not about whether Moko matters, that's settled, but about how it should exist in the modern world. Can Moko evolve and still remain Moko? Should it only be done with traditional uhi? Or can machines serve if the intent is true? Should Moko Kawai be limited to women with wakapapa to wear it? Can Moko be private, or must it always be public? Historians still argue, sometimes gently, sometimes not. Some elders believe the patterns must stay exact. Others say each generation should shape Moko like clay, using the same soil but different hands. Some reject stylized versions popping up in digital art, in tattoo parlors, in fashion design. Others see those echoes as part of the Moko's long breath, a whisper finding new mouths. And then there's the question of ownership. You scroll through a social media post gone viral. A non-Maori influencer in Europe has tattooed a chin design inspired by Polynesian art. The backlash is immediate, furious, and justified. Because Moko isn't style, it's sacred law. You can't wear someone's land story on your face because you like the curves. The man across from you chuckles softly. They always want the beauty, never the burden. You nod, ashamed. He's not angry, just tired. But then he brightens, taps his teacup against the table. I've seen Moko worn in protest marches and poetry slams, in courtrooms and on council boards. I've seen kids recite their wakapapa with their chins inked, trembling but proud. He sets the cup down. We're not debating to tear it apart. We're debating because we care enough to ask. And he's right. The debates swirling now online, in Parliament, in carving schools, they're not signs of division. They're signs of living tradition, of a culture still shaping its laws not in silence, but in skin. And that's what makes Moko so extraordinary. It adapts, not by erasing its past, but by insisting on its relevance. You meet a young woman the next day, first in her family, to get a Moko Kawai in generations. She tells you she wrestled with it for years. I wanted it, I earned it, but I was afraid people would ask me things I wasn't ready to answer. You ask what changed. She smiles. I realized my Moko isn't a conclusion, it's a question mark, and I'm allowed to grow into the answer. You sit with that, let it soak, because that's what this moment feels like, a gathering of voices around the same fire, all speaking the same language, with slightly different accents. Some lines precise, some bold, some still faint and forming, and maybe that's okay. Maybe Moko doesn't need perfect agreement. Maybe it just needs space, to breathe, to evolve, to hold the face of both memory and movement. The old man walks you to the door as dusk settles. You thank him. He shakes his head. Don't thank me, he says. Just look people in the face. Then he touches his own chin gently and smiles, especially the ones who've got something written there. You're dreaming again. Only this time the dream feels older than sleep. You're walking through a place that doesn't quite exist anymore, not in full. It's a village, but also a memory. The people you pass are luminous, as if lit from within. The earth beneath your feet is warm, familiar. Someone calls your name, but it's a name you don't recognize. And then you see them. Faces, hundreds, Mokos shining like constellations in the dim half-light. Some faces you've seen in photos, some only in stories. Some are so new they still seem to hum with the pulse of ink, settling into flesh. Others are etched deep with age, the ridges barely distinguishable from wrinkles, but they still speak. You reach out. One face draws close, and you realize you know this person, not from the world of politics or protest or paperwork, but from lineage, memory, somewhere in your blood or bones. They smile, and you know this is what skin that remembers looks like. The dream shifts. Now you're standing beside a river. Its waters whisper in a tongue you don't quite understand. Along the banks are stones not carved, not marked, but arranged in spirals that mirror Moko patterns. A voice says, "Everything that is written in the face is also written in the land." You kneel, touch the stones, feel something stir behind your eyes. When you look up again, the river is gone and you're standing in front of a mirror. Only it's not your face. It's 1,000 faces. Men, women, children, each with Moko, each looking through you. Their lines are familiar now. You can read them, not fully, but enough. One carries grief, another authority. One bears a broken treaty, another reconciliation. Some are maps of places you will never go. Others are promises you haven't kept yet. And they're all looking to you, waiting. And you realize this isn't a dream, it's a return. You're not here to witness anymore. You're here to remember. You wake slowly. Outside, birds call in the trees. A breeze lifts the curtain. You sit up, heart steady, skin tingling. You move to the mirror. Your own face stares back unmarked, but you lift your hand to your chin anyway, just to see. And in that soft morning light, you catch something invisible. Not a shadow, not a wrinkle, a suggestion, a beginning. You think back to every face you've seen on this journey. The ones who wore Moko without apology. The ones who brought their ancestors into classrooms, boardrooms, marches, and fashion shows. The ones who walked through airports, entered courtrooms, raised their children, buried their dead, all with a face that said it all. And then you whisper it out loud just to hear it. My skin remembers. Not because it carries lines, but because it knows they could be there. The Moko isn't a relic, it's a seed. And every time someone learns to read it, speak it, wear it, or respect it, something grows. So you rise, and you step into the day. Not marked, but not blank either. It's raining. Not heavily, just that soft, persistent drizzle that settles over the hills like a blanket. The kind that makes you walk slower, listen more closely. Notice the way each leaf holds a bead of water like a secret. You're in a valley now. You don't know its name, but it feels familiar. There's a gathering ahead. A fire crackles under a canopy. Around it, faces, some young, some deeply lined, all quiet, not solemn present. You're invited to sit. You do. This is not a ceremony, not a protest, not a lesson. It's something older. Each person begins to speak, not loudly, not all at once. No microphones, no audience, just stories, small ones, about their first Moko, about the decision, the process, the way the lines whispered to them in the mirror before anyone else had the courage to ask why. And one by one, they tell you what their skin carries. A woman with Moko Kauai talks about the moment her daughter asked if she could have one too. She didn't answer with words. She just pulled her close and let their foreheads touch. A man with half a cheek spiral recalls how his grandfather told him, "This line is where your name lives. Never let anyone tell you it belongs on paper instead." Another holds a photo of her mother. No Moko, just the faint shadow of one she was never allowed to wear. She never stopped tracing it on her pillow, the woman says, even when she couldn't say it out loud. Someone brings up the old questions again. Chisel versus machine, tradition versus evolution. But tonight, no one debates. They simply nod. Because they know the truth now. Moko is not a binary. It's a continuum. It doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for presence. You notice in the firelight that no two Moko are alike. And yet they recognize each other. Just like people do. Just like rivers do. just like mountains do when they nod across a valley in silent greeting. And suddenly, you understand. This whole journey wasn't about learning what Moko is. It was about understanding why it's still here. Because it never left. It went quiet. It waited. And now it moves in soft resurgence. Not a wave crashing, but a tide returning. Patient, unstoppable. You look up at the faces surrounding you. Each one is a document, a treaty, a love letter, a warning, a memory, and you're not reading them like you were at the start. You're listening. Rain begins to fall harder now, drumming softly on the tarp above. No one moves. Someone stands, then another. And soon the circle dissolves, not out of urgency, but peace. The fire burns low, and you're left alone for a moment watching the last ember flicker. You reach for your face, not to touch it, just to acknowledge it. And in the quiet, you whisper not to anyone else, just to yourself. My story will not be unsigned. You smile, because maybe one day it will be read, maybe not in ink, maybe not in court, but in a look, a nod, a line, and that will be enough. The rain softens again, tapering into mist. You walk slowly from the valley, each step lighter than the one before. The world doesn't rush you. In fact, it seems to pause with you. Trees standing a little stiller, wind humming low through their branches, like a lullaby you forgot you knew. Your thoughts begin to float now untethered, like feathers on water. You remember the faces, not the exact patterns, not the perfect terms, just the feeling of presence, of story, of skin that speaks. There's comfort in knowing that something so permanent can also be so tender. You breathe in. Let it settle in your chest. You're not being asked to carry everything, just to remember that others have and still do. And that maybe your role is not to tell the story, but to listen long enough that it never disappears. The air grows cooler. Your limbs soften. You don't need to hold anything now. Let the spirals fade behind your eyelids. Let the rain become the rhythm of your rest. Let your breath trace slow patterns like lines on a cheek, written without urgency. Tonight, there are no deadlines, just memory and presence and sleep. So rest now, reader. The Moko will still be there in the morning, and when you wake, the story will still be true.